Hello and welcome to Backstage with Actors Training Ground. I'm your host, Tanner Lagasca. I am so happy to have as my first guest for our debut episode a man who has helped me on my journey as an actor many years ago. He is a nationally acclaimed director. He has received praise for his productions all across the U.S. and has left a trail of successful artists who have had the opportunity to cross his path. Please welcome Paul Barnes. Hey, Paul, welcome.
Thank you, Tanner.
Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule for this. I'm so excited to have you on my first episode, and I can't wait to hear what you have to say to all the actors out there who are dying to know what to do with acting and how to work with directors as well. So my first question for you, though, is what got you started into the arts itself?
Well, I grew up in a family that was very pro-arts, was exposed to a lot as a kid, but it was really taking a drama elective in high school that got me turned towards and excited about theater. I started, as so many people do, as an actor. And because I was a guy in a high school theater program, there were plentiful opportunities. But I realized some years later that almost as soon as I started acting, I also started directing, whether it was doing scene work with classmates or, more full-length projects, or as I did over one Christmas break, I wrote a play for my block that I lived on for the kids on the block to perform. So directing was an interest, and it just took me a while to realize that that was really where I belonged. More than I did as an actor. It was being behind the table rather than in front of the table that seemed to suit me most comfortably.
Did you do any act? I know that you did yeah, I saw you played a flower. Did you do anything else other than that before you had come to the conclusion that maybe being behind the table was where you want to be?
Yeah, I did play a flower. That was in second grade, I think. And then high school and college, I was involved in, real speaking roles in real plays. I took a year and studied professionally at the American Academy of Dramatic Arts in New York City. But at the end of that year, my mom died unexpectedly, and I returned to California to take care of business, to be administrator of her estate. And while I was there, I went back to my old high school and checked in with my high school drama teacher and said, "Hey, I'm back. I've got some time. Put me to work." And so he gave me a couple of his advanced acting students, and we worked on the opening scene between Stella and Blanche from A Streetcar Named Desire.
I love
And I
that.
think that's what sort of led me down the path of becoming a high school drama teacher, which I did. I eventually went back to school, got my degree, my teaching credential, and ended up being the head of a really fine theater program at a school in the Central Valley of California, the town of Stockton. And had a great group of students. They were talented, they were committed, they were hardworking. I had a principal who said, please challenge students with good material. I had supportive parents. It was an incredible environment in which to work. And I was also blessed with a kind of funky black box theater space that was a converted wood shop. And I could, do productions in any kind of configuration that I wanted, whether it was in the round, thrust, proscenium, tennis court style. And so in many ways, I consider my 5 years teaching and directing at Lincoln High School in Stockton as my real director's training, because it was so experiential, which is one of the things that I really think about becoming a director, is that it's one of those learn as you do endeavors. The more you do it, the more you learn, the better you become.
Mhm.
Theater was always kind of the backbone and the spine of what I wanted to do and what I was doing. But I had a few, detours before I became purely a professional theater director.
Did you find that you were easier on the kids in high school, or did you sort of um, uphold them to what you were expecting a professional actor to do?
I did hold the students to high standards. It was a very disciplined program, and I think the students really appreciated that, respected it, and also, frankly, as they have told me on more than one occasion, feared me a bit.
Yes.
Because, well, I mean, you remember from working with me at PCPA that,
Yes.
in those days I had not as much patience as I do now, and something of a temper, which is mostly, gone its way.
Right.
So,
But the
but
other thing, I will say this though. I think that while yes, I mean you were a very prominent figure at PCPA, and everyone wanted to do well because they wanted to make you happy. But but the strictures that you put on us, I think, just helped us become better artists because we then knew what the protocol was and how we had to hold ourselves. So I'm actually very thankful that that you were kind of a hard ass, so to speak, because it made me hold myself to a level that I now hold my students to. Like I go, this is what I want from you, so like you influenced me on how I also teach. So I mean, I thank you for that for sure.
Well, thanks. I think that, one of the things that has become so apparent is that it's a highly competitive field. And so
Hmm.
you need to be at the top of your game. And that's not just being a talented actor, it's being an actor with a really strong work ethic, or a director with a really strong work ethic, because those are the people who are going to get rehired.
Right.
Be good at what you do and be a good person to work with.
So how do you deal with someone who is not that? How do you handle that as a director? Like, what do you do in order to make sure that the production has the standards that you want for it from an actor who maybe not giving you what you want?
Well, it varies. There are so many answers to that question, and it varies situation to situation, actor to actor. I mean, sometimes it's a very frank, direct conversation that you have to have with an actor. I usually try to start there, keeping it friendly but focused, and saying,
Hmm.
I'm having a hard time because you're pretty consistently late, or another one is, until you get off book, there's not much I can do to help you.
Right.
If an actor doesn't seem to be working on his or her lines, and that's a whole other thing, because every actor has his or her, or their own process. And some need, to keep the book in hand for a long period of time. Others come in completely memorized. It varies actor to actor. So you have to be, as a director in general, sensitive and flexible to the individual, while keeping the production moving forward, keeping the whole in mind. The bottom line is, when you're working professionally, that the one reason an actor can be fired from a job is due to lateness. And so if tardiness or lateness is the problem, there's a very easy way to deal with it, if you are able to replace an actor.
Hmm.
If it really is that serious and that detrimental. One of the things about the business is that we all talk to each other. So if I want to work with an actor with whom I haven't worked before, and I see that, you or somebody I know and trust has worked with that person, I will place a phone call and say, hey, what was your experience with so and so?
Hmm.
And trust that response, whatever it is, whether it's positive or negative. You know, um, there's a whole lot of talking that goes on between people, and plus you build up your own personal sense of a person's character,
Hmm.
as well as people's reputation, follows them. You trust your own instincts, and you also tend, as a director, especially one who has worked as long and as consistently as I have, to there are a certain group of actors that I know I can depend on, and if they're right for a production and they're interested in being cast, I will lean in that direction. At the same time, I always want to be open to working with people I haven't worked with before, who are new to me, because that is always exciting and usually very rewarding. So,
Yeah.
it's a balance, it's a
Yeah,
mix.
it's true. And it's funny you mentioned that, if you know somebody who's worked with somebody, you'll call them. It's amazing how small, when you think about it, the theater community is, because
Yeah.
a lot of actors do, I mean, especially when they're younger, do summer stock, and they'll work at one state and another state next year, and you build these bonds, and before you know it, there's like 6 degrees to anybody. You can say, oh, I've worked with this person, or they've worked. So I
Yep.
think it's very important. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, I think you would agree that I think it's very important that we always should put ourselves at the most professional level, because you never know who knows somebody else.
Yeah. Yeah.
So on your website, you mentioned that you're a storyteller when it comes to directing,
Hmm.
and you have done many different types. You've done musicals and Shakespeare and standard and reviews. Is there any type of storytelling that you, as a director, enjoy telling the most?
I like them all, but what I like is if it's a well-written script, because a well-written script will support you as a director, you as a designer, you as an actor, um, much more readily than poor writing. And often when you get a script that's weaker or thinner, or has more potholes in it, so to speak, you spend a lot of your time figuring out how to shore up that particular story. um, but a well-written script is what excites me the most. And I really love it all. I mean, I love doing musicals, I love doing Shakespeare, love the classics.
Mm-hmm.
As I know them, and of late, my career has veered off into more new work, new plays than it started out with when I started freelancing. Although prior to that, I had certainly helped develop new works. But in the last few years, I've done, I think, more new plays than I had previously, and that's very exciting. I think with the amount of Shakespeare that I've worked in, I have a really good ear and a good eye for character development, structure, plot, all of that. And I think I have something of value to contribute to the new play process.
You mentioned Shakespeare. Did you study Shakespeare during your college training, or did that come from just you on your own learning about Shakespeare?
It was pretty much me on my own learning about Shakespeare. I had, of course, in high school, we read a different play a year in English classes. And then I had one Shakespeare class, I think, when I was in college. But it was really coming to the Oregon Shakespeare Festival when I was teaching in Stockton and taking an actual teacher's workshop
Mm-hmm.
that introduced me to techniques for bringing his plays alive on stage and in the classroom, and then just doing it. That really got me launched into Shakespeare, and
Mm-hmm.
then seeing a lot of his plays was I worked at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival as their education director for about 8 years, 8 or 9 years, before I came to PCPA. And I was exposed to so much Shakespeare here that by the time I got to PCPA, I was sort of considered the Shakespeare director there. I was, if there was a Shakespeare play in the season, I was generally the person who directed it.
As a younger actor, I didn't like Shakespeare either. Now, do you think Shakespeare is important for an actor to learn in order to be an actor, even if they aren't going to do Shakespeare?
No, I think it's important for actors. For one thing, there's a whole lot of Shakespeare work out there. I mean, I say that assuming that we will return to work after
Right.
we get past this, dreadful situation with COVID-19. I mean, there's such a great tradition of Shakespeare in this country, and so many cities and states have their own Shakespeare festivals, and so therefore, there's a lot of opportunity. There's a lot of employment in Shakespeare. So I think it's just a practical thing for actors, but I also think in a larger sense, Shakespeare is a foundation. It's a foundationary, tool, if that makes sense. Um, And I think actors that can do Shakespeare can do anything. Yeah, I think it's pretty important. I think you can certainly have a career that in which you rarely do Shakespeare. I don't think you have to be good at Shakespeare to be a working actor. I think it really helps.
Do you have any directors that influenced you in your style of directing, or are you a combination of everyone, or is there one particular person that you sort of lean towards?
Well, I think I'm a combination of many people, and I think, eventually you sort of evolve and develop your own style and your own unique sense. But I've been influenced by, certainly Jim Edmondson of the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, and several other directors who worked at the festival pretty regularly, from Jerry Turner to Pat Patton. I saw a lot of William Ball's work at the American Conservatory Theater when it
Mm.
was first established in San Francisco. And that was revelatory to me, just in terms of his ability with uh, spectacle and the grand theatrical flourish. Garland Wright, who was the artistic director at the Guthrie for a number of years, was influential. His productions were always, visually very arresting and ethereal almost. But interestingly, I got to observe a director at PCPA. He was from the University of Texas, James Moss, I think. He understood thrust stages so well, and I used to watch him in his blocking rehearsals or staging rehearsals and just pick up a lot of technique from watching the way he moved actors around a thrust stage. So I've learned from a lot of people, and so much of directing, I think, as I already said, comes from the doing, but a lot comes from observing,
Mhm.
seeing theater as much as you possibly can,
Yeah.
and getting into the rehearsal room and watching other directors work. Book learning, there's certainly a lot that can be um, uh, acquired through, some good textbooks. But I think it's such a, three-dimensional visceral form that I think you really need to do it.
Well, we're going to take a small little break, and then when we come back, we'll continue our interview with Paul Barnes. And we're back with Paul Barnes. Okay, so Paul, you have done a lot of work, and you had mentioned earlier, you're attracted to the words of a play, a well-written play. What has been for you the most challenging play in directing or in a venue?
Wow. Good question. I mean, every play presents its own challenge, and there I go with another kind of cop-out answer. But I would say certainly Hamlet may have been the most challenging play that I've worked on. It comes with so much baggage attached to it, and you have to sort of find a way to release the baggage, to just let go of what people have written about it, what people have said about it, what people have thought about it, and find your way into the story on your own.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and it's a great story, and it's a long play, and it's a big play with a lot of big ideas. So I think that was probably the most challenging production, certainly in the last few years that I've worked on. They gave me a very generous schedule to work on Hamlet. I directed it at Repertory Theater of St. Louis a few years ago.
Hmm.
So I had everything working in my favor, including a lot of actors I had worked with, a lot who were new to me but were really terrific, designers I had worked with. So there's a lot of shorthand from the very beginning, and that always helps.
So you mentioned that you directed Hamlet. You've directed, I'm sure, Hamlet more than once. Uh, and because you've worked, at least 2 decades of traveling around and directing, you've probably have directed the same play more than once.
Hmm.
How do you, as a director, keep the play fresh for you without repeating what you did in the past at a previous production?
Well, yeah, I've I've done Romeo and Juliet 13 times. I've done A Midsummer Night's Dream 13 times. I've done Macbeth 6 times, Henry IV Part One, I think 4 times, 3 or 4 times, and many of them, you know, at least twice. And then there are a lot of plays by Shakespeare that I haven't done at all.
Hmm.
So I hope that I get a chance to give several of those a try. What you do is, I think, you learn from your mistakes and try not to repeat them so you can make new ones. It took me a while, for instance, with A Midsummer Night's Dream. There are 3 worlds within that play. There are the world of the mortals, the lovers, who run away to the forest. There is the world of what I prefer to call the supernaturals, Oberon and Titania and Puck and their retinues. And there's the world of the mechanicals, the day laborers who put on the play for the mortals. And trying to understand the function of each of those and the qualities of each of those worlds and then blend them into a cohesive production took me a while to get. I think the supernatural world is easy to get because it's so imaginative, and the mortal world is so straightforward that it's easy to get. But the mechanicals were the trickiest for me because they carry with them that onus, that terrible onus of we have to be the funny guys.
Mm.
And so it took me a while to let go of that and just figure out what exactly are the stakes of their story, and what does that story tell, and how does it feature into the rest of the play. And once I let go of, oh, this has got to be funny, um, then I think the play began to work much more for me. So, you and the great thing about Shakespeare is that there's always something new to be learned. And because we grow as human beings, we always bring something new to, the process when we get to come
Mhm.
back to the plays. We are different. Um, I acted in the Fantastics when I was quite young, and then got to direct it, many years later. And I realized that when I was young, I saw the play only through the eyes of Matt and Louisa, the ingenue couple.
Right,
But when I came back to direct it later, I saw the play so clearly through the eyes of the parents.
right.
So, I mean, there's just who you are as a human being and where you are in your own growth trajectory that will also influence the choices that you make.
Hmm.
I've learned the hard way not to impose on actors choices that other actors made that, really, really worked for
Right.
that particular actor, because those choices come out of such a unique human being, such a unique artist in unique rehearsal circumstances. So trying to replicate that or trying to impose that choice onto another actor, I just think it's deadly.
Yeah.
And you just have to find your own way with the actor and hope that you will find something as good that works in this particular production.
On your website, you had mentioned that you come in, you want, you'll know more than the other people who are working on the play by the time you leave, or as you put it, sneak out the back,
Mhm.
sneak out the back door. They should know more than you. Uh, and you mentioned that you want the play to scream playwright and audience, not director. What do you mean by that? Because most of the times, even when I go see a play, if I see a choice that an actor made or a set design, something, I automatically think, director because they had to okay that.
Uh-huh.
So what do you mean by playwright audience as opposed to director?
Well, I think, your reaction or your response is probably based on, how it is or where it is because you understand the process. But I think to, the average, everyday playgoer, so few of them really have any idea what a director actually does. And
Right.
that's fine. That doesn't bother me in the least. But I think I just, I feel like I'm a conduit from a good script to a good production team. And then I have to, take the input from all sources, shape it into the production, and deliver it.
Mm-hmm.
Encouraging everybody to do their best work, giving them always, a kind of defined playground or jungle gym in which they can do the work. I mean, we're setting the play in this particular time period because I think it's about this or about that. But basically, I want to tell the story, whatever the story is.
Mm-hmm.
And I really resent productions in which what you notice are the big directorial ideas that sometimes may have something to do with the play and may have only to do with the director's ego. A kind of look at me, look what I can do.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so,
Do you think
um,
that that ego is what makes some directors, and I know we're on Shakespeare right now, but where they'll take an idea to implement it into a Shakespeare play, like let's put Romeo and Juliet into space, or do you think that that's because the director's trying to be like, I'm trying to be creative, so people will like notice me?
oh yeah, yeah. Somebody once said to me, a colleague who runs a theater, a large theater in the Midwest, said to me, the only way to do Shakespeare is to find a way to put your brand, your stamp on a play, so that you become known as, oh, that was the such and such, Hamlet, or the such and such Romeo and Juliet.
Mm-hmm.
And I just think that's just the wrong way to go. Let the story lead you to choices. Um, so yeah, so I think it's a competitive business. We're all ambitious. We all want to be noticed. Ego is always involved
Mm-hmm.
in all the things that we do. And sometimes it's just a matter of the degree and how far it gets out of hand and how far away from the story it
Right.
takes you.
Because it's always, no matter what, whether you're the director, whether you're an actor, it's always about telling that story
Yeah.
and getting the audience to have that empathetic connection to the actors and that lovely imaginary world that we've created for them for that 2.5 hours, whether it's Shakespeare or a traditional play. Some of the reviews that you have are like Newsweek has called your work superb. The Opera News has called it profound. Salt Lake City Tribune says seamless, fast-paced, fresh. I mean, you have so many accolades of productions that you have done. Do you find that because of these accolades, and they're not just a few, they're a lot, do you find that this puts extra pressure on you to produce a show that is going to be well received by the audience, not necessarily the reviewers, but by the audience?
Well, naturally, you want it to be well received by the audience, and getting good reviews is very nice. I mean, you have to. I've had bad reviews too, and they generally aren't quoted on my website. But uh, I think it all just comes from that thing about tell the story and work with good material because good material always makes us better.
Right.
Um, and then work with good people.
Mm-hmm.
I don't, I do read reviews. I'm interested in what they have to say. I, especially if they're well-written reviews, thoughtful reviews, and sometimes I will learn something important, from a review. And that's always great. And yeah, I mean, you have to sort of take them with a grain of salt. And if you're going to read them, you have to pay attention to the good ones as well as the bad ones, or the bad ones as well as the good ones.
Right.
I think it's got to be fair game and a level playing field. And I've been fortunate that I have had generally, well-received productions.
Hmm.
For me, it's always about starting over.
Hmm.
You go back to the beginning with every new production, build on the ideas that you've already, discovered work. If you're repeating something you've done before, working on a script before, but be open to the new production and the new experience and create it together.
You're right. You mentioned that, take the good reviews with the bad reviews. So I know actors. I'm one of them. I've read reviews about me that are good. I've read reviews that are bad. I've read reviews I don't agree with. But for those out there who don't know yet or haven't had a review yet or whatever, how much stock should we put into a review that we read, whether we agree with what it says or whether we disagree with what it says?
I think it depends on the reviewer. Um, there are those who are, very astute and very fair. There are those that just want to be, kind of snarky and dismissive or
Right.
clever for their own sake. And the thing that I always keep in mind with reviewers is that, we are the creators, they are the responders, and they have to wait for us to do our work before they can do theirs. And I think that can make people kind of grumpy,
Yes.
because but um, I think don't put a lot of stock in them. They are useful as a director, especially a freelance director. If you are seeking work, and you should always be seeking work. Um, to be able to pass along. I mean, 15 years ago, you passed along copies of the reviews. Now you just send a link,
Right.
maybe an excerpt or two. But you also know that, people will look at them or not look at them, and they're going to think whatever they want to think.
Well, we're going to take a small little break and then we'll come back and we will conclude our interview with Paul Barnes. We are back with Paul Barnes and Backstage with Actors Training Ground. Paul, all right, so let's get into acting and auditioning. There's a rumor going around, it's been for many years, that an actor can go on stage, open his mouth, and within 15 seconds, the director knows if they want to cast that person or not. How much truth is in that saying?
Um, Surprisingly, I think there's a lot of truth in that. And I say that um, from years experience auditioning and casting. Um, you're pretty quick to make up your mind, but I think that the caveat that I would offer, at least for me personally, is I will know pretty quickly in an audition that this is an actor I would like to come back and work, call back and work with in the callback situation, which is the real audition.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, and again, I can only speak for me personally, I remain open to the actor, throughout whatever time he or she, has in the room when they come into audition. One of the things that I learned early on when I started doing a lot of auditioning and casting in New York City, where there was a huge pool of available actors, was that sometimes and often this is the only acting they get to do in a week, is to come in for an audition. And I think we owe people the respect of that time and that experience. You know, whether we end up using them or not using them. I mean, the thing about the profession is that we all know what the odds are. We all know that there are a limited number of jobs and a lot of people vying for those opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
So most actors only ask that they be seen for the amount of time that they've been told they will be seen, and getting to do what they have been, given to do. And I think we owe them that respect and that courtesy. Um, Generally, I can pretty much tell, pretty quickly if this is somebody I'm interested in, but that doesn't mean I shut down for the rest of the audition, because sometimes you go, oh wow, they were a little slow on the runway, but they really took off by the end, or I saw something at the end that I hadn't seen at the beginning.
When you are auditioning, do you go looks first for the character and then the talent, or do you do talent and then I can make them work? How does that work for you, or is it a combination of both?
It's probably a combination of both, and it comes from, both sides. I mean, also there are, some very technical things that go into casting. For instance, with me and Shakespeare is, can an actor, make sense of the verse? Can they speak it smoothly and engagingly, or
Mm-hmm.
or not? If I'm casting a musical, do they have the right vocal range to handle this particular role, this particular song? And
Right.
that often, eliminates, a lot of people right off the bat.
There's also the compatibility of the two actors if they're playing opposite of each other. Because if you have someone who's really tall and they're really great, but the person is too short to play off of them, then it has nothing to do with talent. It has to do with the size as well, or the weight, or whatever the case may be. It's not always about talent. It's also about how well they match together. The cast as an ensemble
Yeah.
work together as well too. That I think directors have to take into account when they are
Yeah, I
casting a
I
show.
agree. And at the same time, I think it's also important to be open so that you don't just dismiss somebody because of physical type.
Right.
Because I think, love, for instance, comes in all packages, all shapes and sizes and combinations. So, I want to be careful of, I try to be careful of prejudging or pre-deciding anything
Mm-hmm.
on that basis. But I think I'm a little bit more open than other directors might be. But
So, what should actors who are new, or even if they've been acting for a while, what should they be aware of when they're auditioning and or rehearsing?
preparation is everything. Um, in an audition, if you're doing like a reading, I think it's important to be really familiar with the scene that you've been given to read. Um, uh, and to be close to memorized, but to not come in without the book. I think the actor that starts with the script in hand, and then gradually is able to just sort of lower it, put it aside, so that they're really connecting. I always find that to be pretty impressive, because it tells me, first of all, they've done their homework, they've prepared, it matters to them,
Mm-hmm.
but they're not giving me their polished performance.
Right.
And I think that that's one thing that directors can shy away from, is if you feel that you're getting the actor's idea or their polished performance, which is what you use the callback for, to really get up on your feet and work with the actor in the space.
Mm-hmm.
I think actors should know how to work with a reader, that person who's sitting in the room with the script, being the other characters in the scene that you're reading, and
Mm-hmm.
that they are your acting partner, and to connect with them.
Yes.
Uh, don't connect with the table, the people at the table, because it makes the people at the table self-conscious in a way, but also maybe unable to take notes or do their part of the job, which is, sometimes for me, it's just remembering, oh, this person, wore such and such, or is, the photo is dark, but they're actually a blonde, or whatever the case may be.
Right.
or you're taking notes about, excellent verse skills or trouble with down endings, and you've got to have the notes, to refer to at the end of a long audition day.
Right.
And again, in rehearsal, be prepared, be flexible, listen, take direction, try what the director asks you to do, um, and just be a good team player.
And I wanna clarify something you said in case someone who's watching does not know. When you say connecting to the table, you mean giving eye contact to
Right.
people at the table besides the reader.
Yeah.
You can
In
give
the
it to the
audition.
reader, but not to the other people.
Yeah. I mean, there are a million rules about auditioning, but in the piece itself, once you have launched into, the scene you're reading or the monologue you're doing, generally it's best to not make eye contact with the people sitting at the table. If it's a monologue from a Shakespeare play and it's not a scene, place the person to whom you are speaking, either just slightly diagonally to your left or right, or above the people at the table, but
Mm-hmm.
not directly at them,
Right.
unless it's a speech that breaks the fourth wall and is dependent on contact with actual people.
And in that case, what I tell my students to do is you look but don't really look. You're generally looking in that direction, but you're not actually making specific eye contact with anybody, so they're not getting that feeling of, oh, I have to act with you now.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the worst thing.
Yeah, it's not my job. It's not my job.
Not like it. Yeah. Okay, so I auditioned for you. I don't get the part. Oh my gosh, that's 90% of the business, right? We don't get the part we want, or we don't get cast. How do we deal with that? What is a great way for us to as actors or a director to deal with not getting, either a callback or the actual part?
Well, you have to, and directors have to do the same thing too. I see opportunities that I wish had come to me, go to other people. Sometimes people I really respect, sometimes people I don't particularly respect. And that's just part of it. It's just you have to accept from the get-go that is part of it, and that you will hear no a lot more than you will hear yes. But once you do hear yes, it erases all the other no's. A good friend of mine who's an actor, who's been in the business, done a lot of regional work, done some Broadway work, said that she will take herself for a cup of coffee if her audition is in the morning, or a drink if her audition is in the afternoon. She gives herself 30 minutes to beat herself up for all the mistakes she made, and to praise herself for all of the things that she felt went right, and to sort of check in with herself about what she may have learned. 30 minutes, and then that's it. She's on to the next thing. And I think it's that moving on to the next thing that's really important, whether it's, I've got a class to get to, or I'm going to, work on the next upcoming audition, or I'm going to work on a new Shakespeare piece, or whatever it is. But you have to cut the string on the balloon and let the balloon float away. And you have to realize that, it's not as personal as it feels. You just don't happen to be what that particular director is looking for at that particular time for that particular play. You may be totally ready to play, Romeo, but if the director is looking for, a different kind of Romeo who's 6'6", rather than, 5'10" or whatever, you're not going to be that person.
Right.
So, so much of it is just not personal. Yeah, and don't let not getting the job diminish your value, your self-esteem. It's hard to say, easier to say than it is to do. But try your best to not say, "Oh my God, I have no talent," or "I'm not worth it," or anything.
Right.
You have talent, you have training, and and if it just doesn't work out, it's not going to work out, and you can always change your mind.
Right.
But if you feel called to the work, I think it's important to answer the call if you can.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. You have met many actors, beginning, intermediate, who have gone on to do other things, different levels of success, but a lot of success. How does that make you feel, knowing that you somehow had a hand in helping these young actors make something of themselves in a business that is very lucrative at best?
Of course, it's gratifying and it's rewarding. I I don't pat myself on the back very much
Mm-hmm.
uh, about it. It's really nice to hear from, young actors or actors who were young when you first worked with them, and who or who you trained. Who Gail, your Shakespeare teacher, always had a saying about one day the penny will drop.
Mm-hmm.
And often I will hear from a former student who will write to me and in one way or another says, the penny just dropped. I really get what you were talking about, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, whatever. So thank you. And it's always gratifying and rewarding. And the idea of helping people up in the profession is very, very rewarding.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it's always great to see. And it's really, very rewarding to see how many people have continued and stayed with it in one way or another, in one form or another. I mean, that's great. And it's what you hope for, when you
Right.
go into, any kind of teaching. And I think directing is a kind of teaching. You're always teaching. But I don't dwell on it. It's frankly, it's there's the next job to be found.
Right.
So
So, because you work a lot, I'm sure you get burnt out. I mean, as a director, you're constantly thinking. I don't think people realize how much thinking a director does when it comes
mhm.
to working on a production. So, what do you do to rejuvenate those creative juices to get you back in that creative mode again?
Well, let's see. I read, I hike, I listen to a lot of music, and I spend time with friends.
Nice. What kind of music inspires you, out of
Oh,
curiosity?
all kinds. I'm a music lover. I'm not not too big on heavy metal or punk rock, but just about anything else. I mean, I love a lot of classical music, love a lot of pop. I love country music. I love musical show tunes.
Oh,
Uh, you know,
just
it
everything.
all depends on the mood, where I am, and what's available.
So we are definitely living in a time of uncertainty
Hmm.
when with theater is concerned right now, and I see theaters making or trying to make sense of this craziness. What encouragement can you give to actors right now who are not able to audition because theaters are not open? They haven't figured out how to do online productions exactly quite yet. So, what advice can you give to actors right now who are getting in the business, who are now dealing with this new snag in the acting theatrical world?
I think my advice is be patient, have faith. I mean, the theater has survived other plagues. It's been around a long, long time. And I think the need for people to gather in the same room to hear a story well told
Mm.
is always going to be present and part of who we are as human beings. So be patient. In a more specific sense, I would say, as much as you can, listen, think. I think it's in many ways it's a great this intermission, as I tend to think of it, is a great opportunity to do a lot of things, to expand in a direction that you've been intrigued by but never had a chance to follow through on, if it's possible to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly to think about what is the theater going to become, and to have a hand in that as best you can. to read plays with friends. I mean, there's so many kinds of Zoom readings taking place, whether they're for the public or not for the public.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that kind of thing. And other people I know, especially graduates of undergraduate programs, are really looking into advanced training right now. That going into an MFA program, this might be exactly the right time to do something like that, because there is a pause in employment.
Mm-hmm.
So to use the time to further your training, may be a really helpful thing to do. At the same time that I say that, of course, all of this depends on having the means to do it. I mean, right now, and especially this week, when the unemployment benefits have been rescinded, and
Mm-hmm.
people are beginning to get eviction notices, everybody's circumstances are different, and many people's circumstances are dire and going to get even more dire. So it's easy to say, well, go to school, or do this, when people are really thinking about, how am I going to put gas in my car, and what am I going to eat, and will I have a roof over my head?
Right.
So but if you have those concerns under control, I mean, look at this as a time for growth in new and unexpected ways.
Yeah. Do you think that theater slash acting is going to change due to our current situation that we're having in our country? I mean, do you see it shifting where theater will become both like in person and online, or just only online? I mean, do you see any kind of change happening?
Well, for me, and I can only speak for myself personally, I hope it doesn't go to online, because I find online stuff so distancing,
Mm-hmm.
because you're just not in the room. And I think that's the heart and the soul and the nut of theater, is that you're all in the same room.
Yeah.
There's a very successful dinner theater in Indianapolis, Indiana, that is reopening, or has reopened, and they posted a video of their plans and everything they were doing to keep people safe and socially distanced and all of that. And their video ended with a live shot of an actor, I think maybe doing something from The Little Mermaid, with one of those face shield guards on. And the whole thing was, I thought, oh my God, this is so not what theater is. It's so pristine and so clean and so safe. And I don't think theater is any of those things. And I think theater will come back in that sense. I think what we may see changes in is content, the kinds of plays that people are producing, subject matter,
Mm-hmm.
and increased diversity in not just in casting and who we see on stage, but who is backstage, who's in administration, who is writing the plays. I think that was already beginning to happen, and then the George Floyd murder happened, and I mean that just catapulted what was already people chomping at the bit in the theater, which I think usually the arts are way ahead of general society.
Mm-hmm.
That just kind of catapulted all of that into a greater awareness, a greater consciousness, a greater urgency. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think when live theater returns, those are going to be the changes we'll see.
Any parting words of advice for anybody getting into acting from someone who's been in the business for a while?
I think if you really feel the calling, I think it's important to answer the call, knowing that sometimes all you get is a busy signal, or somebody hangs up on you. But you don't want to end up being a person who said, gee, if I had only done this or done that.
Yeah.
So if you can, I would say answer the call. It's
Right.
it's an amazing and very difficult, challenging, rewarding, glorious profession.
Yeah, I agree. All right. So, in memory of James Lipton, who passed away this year, he hosted
Uh-oh.
Inside the Actor Studio, and at the end of his show, he would ask questions based on Pavot, who also asked questions to his guests. So I thought I would use some of those questions, but also create some of my own and have my own 10 questions for you to answer. So these are just one word or one sentence questions, but here we go. So, Paul, What is your favorite sound?
A heartbeat.
What is your least favorite sound?
Um, Jim Jordan.
What scares you?
Trump.
What brings you joy?
My partner.
What is your favorite swear word?
Fuck.
What other profession would you like to attempt if you couldn't direct?
Architecture.
If anything, what is your biggest regret?
I don't think I have one.
What do you consider your strongest trait?
Loyalty.
What do you consider your weakest trait?
Laziness.
And then finally, what do you want to be remembered for?
Kindness.
Awesome. Paul, thank you so much. I appreciate you taking out the time for this interview. And I just wish you the best in future endeavors. This
Well,
has
thank you,
been,
Tanner.
you're welcome.
This has been a pleasure.
And it has been a pleasure for me too as well. This has been Backstage with Actors Training Ground. We hope you enjoyed this episode and look forward to showing you the next one. Till then, thank you.